My name is Rebecca, and at 28 years old, I thought I knew everything about my father's life. We talked every Sunday, shared holiday traditions, and I even had keys to his house in Portland where I'd grown up. So when a stranger answered his landline and introduced herself as Mrs. Davidson, your father's wife, my world shifted completely. But it wasn't until she casually mentioned that I was now considered a tenant in what I thought was still my childhood home that I realized how deeply I'd been betrayed by the man who raised me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I had always been Daddy's little girl, even well into my 20s. My father, Marcus Davidson, was a 54-year-old insurance adjuster who worked for Pacific Northwest Mutual, a regional company where he'd built a reputation for being thorough and fair. After my mother died from breast cancer when I was 16, it had been just the two of us navigating life together in our cozy 3-bedroom ranch house on Maple Street. The house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac lined with mature oak trees, complete with the white picket fence that my mother had always wanted, and the garden shed where Dad stored his weekend woodworking projects. Our relationship had weathered the typical storms of teenage rebellion, college years, and my eventual move to Seattle for work. But we'd maintained a closeness that I treasured. Every Sunday at exactly 2 o'clock Pacific time, Dad would call to check in on my week. We'd discuss everything from my job as a marketing coordinator at a sustainable fashion startup called Verde Threads, to his latest home improvement projects, to our shared obsession with true crime podcasts. These conversations were the anchor of my week, a reliable constant in an otherwise unpredictable adult life. I lived in a studio apartment in Capitol Hill, a trendy neighborhood where the rent consumed nearly 40% of my modest salary, but I loved the energy of the city. My social life revolved around my coworker friends, particularly my best friend Zoe, a graphic designer who shared my love of vintage thrift stores and weekend hiking trips. We'd often joke about our complicated family situations over Sunday brunch, though I always felt fortunate that my relationship with Dad was so solid compared to her ongoing drama with divorced parents who used her as a messenger service. The holiday traditions Dad and I maintained were sacred to both of us. Every Thanksgiving, I'd drive the 3 hours south to Portland, and we'd recreate my mother's elaborate feast, even though it was far too much food for 2 people. Christmas morning meant pancakes shaped like snowmen, a tradition that had started when I was 7, and that we stubbornly refused to abandon despite my advancing age. Easter brought our annual attempt at my mother's complicated lemon cake recipe, which we never quite mastered, but enjoyed trying nonetheless. Dad had been alone since Mom's death 12 years ago, and while I occasionally encouraged him to start dating again, he always brushed off the suggestion with a joke about being too set in his ways. He seemed content with his routine of work, weekend projects, his Tuesday night bowling league, and our regular phone calls. He'd made a few close friends through his job and had maintained relationships with some of Mom's relatives, particularly her sister Linda, who lived in Sacramento and visited twice a year. My childhood bedroom remained virtually unchanged, decorated with posters from my high school years and still containing boxes of yearbooks and photo albums that I'd never gotten around to moving to Seattle. The room served as both a guest room and a shrine to my adolescence, complete with the desk where I'd written college application essays and the window seat where I'd spent countless hours reading. Dad often mentioned that he liked keeping it ready for my visits, and I'd grown accustomed to thinking of it as my room, my space, my connection to home. Our communication extended beyond the weekly phone calls to frequent text exchanges throughout the week. Dad had reluctantly embraced texting at my insistence, though his messages were always formal and complete sentences, signed with his full name as if they were business correspondence. He'd send me photos of his latest woodworking projects, updates on the neighbors, and occasional links to news articles he thought would interest me. I'd respond with pictures of my Seattle adventures, complaints about my boss Miranda, who had a tendency to schedule last-minute meetings on Friday afternoons, and updates on my dating life, which Dad followed with the appropriate mixture of interest and protective skepticism. The house itself held layers of memories that made it feel like a living archive of our family history. The kitchen still contained my mother's favorite coffee mug, a ceramic piece shaped like a sunflower that Dad used every morning. The living room featured her reading chair, a burgundy recliner where she'd spent her final months wrapped in the quilt her mother had made. The master bedroom remained largely untouched, with Mom's jewelry box still sitting on the dresser and her favorite books still occupying half the bookshelf. Dad's social life appeared limited but sufficient for his needs. He'd mention conversations with neighbors like Mrs. Chen next door, who kept him updated on neighborhood gossip, and Bob Martinez across the street, who shared his interest in vintage cars. His bowling team consisted of 4 other men his age, who worked in various insurance and banking jobs around Portland. They'd occasionally go out for beers after their games, and Dad would regale me with stories of their friendly competitions and gentle ribbing about each other's techniques. Work provided Dad with additional social connections and a sense of purpose that had helped him cope after Mom's death. He genuinely enjoyed helping people navigate the complexities of insurance claims, particularly in situations involving natural disasters that were becoming increasingly common in the Pacific Northwest. His colleagues respected his expertise, and he'd been promoted twice in the past decade, most recently to senior adjuster, a position that came with a modest salary increase and more interesting cases involving commercial properties. The financial arrangement we'd maintained since I'd moved to Seattle was informal but clear. Dad covered all the household expenses and maintenance, while I contributed to groceries and utilities during my visits, and helped with larger purchases like the new refrigerator he'd needed last spring. He'd never asked me to pay rent for staying in my childhood room during visits, and I'd never considered that I should. The house felt like our shared family space, a place where I belonged by virtue of birth and blood and 28 years of memories. My own career was finally gaining momentum after several years of uncertainty and job changes. Verde Threads was a small but growing company focused on sustainable fashion, and my role involved managing social media campaigns, coordinating with influencers, and developing content that highlighted the environmental benefits of their clothing line. The work aligned with my values and provided creative challenges that kept me engaged, though the startup environment meant long hours and occasionally delayed paychecks that made budgeting a constant balancing act. Dating in Seattle had proven more challenging than I'd anticipated when I'd moved there 4 years earlier. The city's tech-heavy demographics meant I often found myself on awkward first dates with software engineers who seemed more comfortable discussing algorithms than emotions. My last serious relationship had ended 8 months earlier when Trevor, a marketing manager at a gaming company, decided he wanted to move to Austin for a job opportunity that I wasn't ready to follow. The breakup had been amicable but had left me questioning whether I was too attached to my Pacific Northwest roots to ever find lasting.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Love. The rhythm of my life felt stable and predictable in the best possible way. Weekdays were consumed by work deadlines and social obligations, while weekends offered a mix of Seattle adventures and quiet time in my small apartment. Once a month, I'd drive to Portland for extended visits with Dad, usually timing these trips around his bowling tournaments or neighborhood events where I could catch up with people who'd known me since childhood. These visits reinforced my sense of belonging and continuity, providing a comforting counterbalance to the sometimes overwhelming pace of city life. Dad's house sat in a neighborhood that had remained remarkably stable over the years. Most of our neighbors were longtime residents who'd raised their children there and were now enjoying retirement or the empty nest phase of life. The Chens had lived next door for 15 years and treated me like a daughter, always asking about my job and love life with genuine interest. The Martinez family across the street had teenagers who sometimes helped Dad with yard work in exchange for $20 bills and life advice about college applications. The local community provided Dad with a sense of belonging that I thought was sufficient for his emotional needs. He'd attended the same Methodist church for over 20 years, where he served as an usher and occasionally helped with building maintenance projects. The congregation knew our family's story and had been incredibly supportive during Mom's illness and after her death. Pastor Williams had officiated at Mom's funeral and continued to check in on Dad regularly, often stopping by for coffee and conversation about everything from theology to baseball. Holidays were particularly meaningful because they allowed us to honor Mom's memory while creating new traditions that reflected our changed family structure. Thanksgiving meant cooking together while sharing stories about Mom's legendary kitchen disasters and triumphant culinary achievements. Christmas involved decorating the tree with ornaments collected over 3 decades of marriage and parenthood, each one triggering memories that we'd share while sipping hot chocolate. These celebrations felt sacred, connecting us to our past while affirming our continued bond as father and daughter. The financial security that Dad had worked so hard to build provided both of us with peace of mind about the future. He'd been diligent about saving for retirement and had maintained excellent life insurance coverage through his job. The house was paid off, achievement he'd celebrated quietly but proudly when he'd made the final mortgage payment 3 years earlier. This stability meant that I could pursue my somewhat unpredictable career in sustainable fashion without worrying about family financial pressures, and Dad could approach his eventual retirement with confidence. My independence as an adult had been carefully balanced with maintaining strong family connections, a balance that felt healthy and sustainable. I valued my autonomy and the life I was building in Seattle, but I also treasured the security of knowing that home base was always available. Dad seemed to appreciate this arrangement as well, enjoying his quiet routine while looking forward to my regular visits and our constant communication. Neither of us felt the need to rush into major life changes, content with the stability we'd created together. The summer of my 28th year felt particularly promising. Verde Threads was expanding into new markets, potentially offering opportunities for advancement and salary increases that would improve my financial situation. I'd started seeing a marine biologist named Connor, who seemed genuinely interested in building something meaningful rather than just casual dating. Dad had mentioned that he was considering some home renovations, possibly updating the kitchen that still featured appliances from the 1990s, a project that excited me because it suggested he was thinking about the future rather than just preserving the past. Our Sunday phone calls during this period were filled with optimistic planning and gentle encouragement for each other's endeavors. Dad would ask detailed questions about my work projects and offer practical advice about navigating office politics. I'd listen to his ideas about home improvements and suggest contractors I'd found through online research. These conversations reinforced our mutual respect and the genuine friendship that had developed alongside our father-daughter relationship. The neighborhood's social dynamics provided Dad with regular interaction and mild entertainment that seemed to satisfy his need for community. Mrs. Chen would update him on the latest homeowners association drama, while Bob Martinez would share gossip about property values and local politics. The postal worker, a friendly woman named Janet who'd had the same route for a decade, would often chat with Dad about weather predictions and neighborhood changes. These casual relationships created a social network that I assumed was sufficient for his emotional well-being. Dad's work environment also offered social connections that extended beyond professional obligations. His team would occasionally organize potluck dinners or attend local baseball games together, activities that Dad mentioned enjoying without seeming particularly invested in deepening these friendships. His closest work friend was probably Sandra, a fellow adjuster in her late 40s who shared his methodical approach to complex cases and his dry sense of humor about insurance industry bureaucracy. The house itself continued to serve as a repository of family history and a symbol of the life Dad and Mom had built together. Photo albums filled with vacation pictures, school events, and holiday celebrations lined the bookshelf in the living room. Mom's recipe box remained in its designated kitchen drawer, even though Dad had never attempted most of the more complicated dishes. Her gardening tools still hung in the shed, though Dad had simplified the landscaping considerably since her death, maintaining the basics but abandoning her more ambitious flower beds. My own sense of identity remained closely tied to this family home and the relationships it represented. When Seattle friends asked about my background, I'd describe growing up in Portland with parents who'd provided stability and love, losing my mother at a crucial time, and maintaining a close relationship with my father that had helped us both navigate grief and change. This narrative felt complete and truthful, representing the foundation that had shaped my values and my approach to relationships. The predictability of our arrangement felt comfortable rather than boring. Dad's Tuesday bowling nights were as reliable as sunrise, and his weekend projects followed seasonal patterns that I could anticipate months in advance. Spring meant garden preparation and house painting, summer brought camping trips and barbecues with neighbors, Fall required leaf cleanup and preparation for Pacific Northwest winters, and winter provided time for indoor projects and planning for the following year's improvements. This stability had allowed both of us to process our grief over Mom's death gradually and thoroughly, without the additional stress of major life changes or relationship complications. We'd learned to honor her memory while moving forward with our individual lives, a balance that had taken several years to achieve but now felt natural and healthy. I assumed we'd continue this pattern indefinitely, with gradual changes as Dad aged and my career developed, but no dramatic disruptions to the foundation we'd built together. The phone call that would shatter this comfortable world came on a Tuesday evening in late August, just as I was settling in to review social media analytics for Verde Thread's latest campaign. I'd been expecting to hear from Connor about weekend plans or possibly from Zoe about her latest dating disaster, so when Dad's landline number appeared on my caller ID, I felt a moment of concern. He never called on Tuesday evenings because of bowling league, and our BATSA, established communication pattern, was so reliable that any deviation felt potentially significant. I answered cheerfully, assuming perhaps his bowling had been canceled due to weather, or that he had exciting news about a home renovation project. Instead, a woman's voice greeted me with warm but unfamiliar tone that immediately put me on alert. She introduced herself as Angela Davidson, explaining that she was Marcus's wife and that she'd been looking forward to meeting me for quite some time. The words hit me like physical blows, each one contradicting everything I thought I knew about my father's life and our relationship. Angela continued talking, apparently oblivious to my stunned silence, mentioning that she and Dad had been married for 3 months and that she was excited to welcome me into their blended family. She described the small ceremony they'd had at Portland City Hall, attended by a few of Dad's work colleagues, and her sister from Vancouver. The casual way she recounted these details suggested that she assumed I already knew about the marriage and was simply calling to establish a connection with her new stepdaughter. When I finally found my voice and asked to speak with Dad, Angela explained that he was at the hardware store, picking up supplies for a bathroom renovation project she'd been planning. She mentioned that they were updating the master bathroom to better accommodate both of their needs, including installing a larger vanity with dual sinks and replacing the shower with a more modern design. These domestic details felt like evidence of an entirely different life that Dad had been living parallel to the one I thought I knew. The conversation took an even more surreal turn when Angela began discussing practical arrangements for my future visits to Portland. She explained that since they were using my childhood bedroom as Angela's home office, I'd need to let them know in advance when I planned to visit so they could prepare the guest room in the basement. She mentioned that there would be a modest charge for overnight stays to help cover additional utilities and household expenses, describing this arrangement as standard practice for adult children who no longer lived at home full-time. The word tenant emerged naturally in her explanation of these new arrangements, delivered without malice but with a business-like efficiency that made my head spin. Angela described how she'd researched fair rental rates for guest accommodations in the Portland area and had developed what she considered a reasonable fee structure based on the basement room's size and amenities. She seemed proud of her thorough approach to this logistical challenge, completely unaware that she was dismantling my entire understanding of home and family with each practical detail. As Angela continued outlining house rules and expectations for my future visits, I felt my grip on reality loosening. This woman who'd been married to my father for 3 months was calmly explaining that I would need to provide advance notice for visits, pay for the privilege of staying in what used to be my family home, and respect the privacy of their marriage by limiting my access to common areas during evening hours. The casual authority in her voice suggested that these arrangements had been discussed and decided without any input from me whatsoever. The phone call ended with Angela expressing hope that we'd become close friends, and mentioning that she'd prepared a small gift basket for my next visit, featuring local Portland specialties and a welcome card for new family members. She provided her direct phone number and email address, encouraging me to reach out with any questions about the new household arrangements. The cheerful efficiency of her tone made the entire conversation feel like a business transaction rather than a family discussion. After hanging up, I sat in my Capitol Hill apartment staring at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. The man who called me every Sunday without fail, who'd never mentioned dating anyone seriously, who still kept Mom's coffee mug in daily, through a rotation, had apparently been married for 3 months to a woman who was treating me like a paying customer in my own childhood home. The betrayal felt comprehensive, encompassing not just the secret marriage but the complete transformation of our relationship dynamic, without any consultation or warning. The practical implications began sinking in as the initial shock subsided. My childhood bedroom, the space that had remained unchanged as a symbol of my permanent place in Dad's life, was now Angela's office. My spontaneous weekend visits, the easy access I'd always enjoyed to my family home, had been replaced by a reservation system with associated fees. Most importantly, the father-daughter relationship that had been the cornerstone of my adult life had apparently been redefined without my knowledge or consent. I tried calling Dad's cell phone repeatedly over the next 2 hours, getting voicemail each time. His outgoing message was the same as always, his familiar voice instructing callers to leave detailed messages and promising to return calls within 24 hours. The normalcy of his recorded voice contrasted sharply with the complete upheaval Angela had just described, making the entire situation feel even more surreal and disorienting. Sleep was impossible that night as I replayed every recent conversation with Dad, searching for clues I'd missed about this massive life change. Had his mentions of home renovation projects actually been references to Angela's presence? When he'd talked about trying new recipes, had he been cooking for two instead of experimenting with bachelor cooking? The Sunday phone calls that had seemed so reliable and honest now felt like carefully edited performances designed to hide an entirely different reality. The emotional impact was complicated by practical concerns about my own living situation and future plans. The Portland house had always been my backup plan, the place I could return to if Seattle life became unaffordable or unsatisfying. Knowing that I now needed reservations and rental fees to access that safety net fundamentally changed my financial calculations and long-term planning. The security I'd taken for granted had evaporated in a single phone conversation with a stranger who was now apparently my stepmother. Morning brought no clarity, only a deeper sense of betrayal, as I realized how thoroughly Dad had compartmentalized his life to hide this relationship from me. The man who'd raised me to value honesty and communication had been living a double life for months, maintaining our regular contact while building an entirely new family structure. The disconnect between his parenting lessons and his actual behavior felt like an additional layer of deception that would require its own processing and healing. The workday ahead promised to be a struggle as I attempted to focus on VertiThread's responsibilities, while my personal world had been completely destabilized. My colleagues would eventually notice my distraction, and I'd need to decide how much to share about family drama that I didn't yet fully understand myself. The story was too complicated and painful to summarize casually, yet too consuming to hide completely from people who interacted with me daily. Angela's cheerful efficiency had made it clear that she viewed these changes as positive improvements to family dynamics, rather than devastating betrayals of trust and connection. Her perspective suggested that Dad had presented our relationship in terms that justified her takeover of household management and redefinition of my role from daughter to occasional guest. The casual way she'd discussed charging me rent indicated that Dad had either agreed to or suggested this arrangement, adding another layer of hurt to an already overwhelming situation. The 3-month timeline for their marriage meant that Dad had been keeping this secret since late spring, covering the entire period when I'd been optimistic about work developments and new relationships. Every Sunday phone call during that period had been an exercise in selective disclosure, with Dad carefully editing his life story to maintain the illusion of our close communication, while hiding the most significant change he'd ever made. The scale of the deception felt almost incomprehensible given our history of openness and mutual trust. As I prepared for another day of trying to pretend my world hadn't fundamentally shifted, I realized that recovering from this betrayal would require not just processing the immediate shock, but rebuilding my entire understanding of family, home, and the relationship that had anchored my adult life. The woman who'd introduced herself as my stepmother had unknowingly delivered the news that would force me to completely reconsider who I was and where I belonged in the world. The next 3 days passed in a haze of disbelief and mounting anger as I attempted to reach Dad through every possible channel. His cell phone went straight to voicemail after the second ring, suggesting he was actively declining my calls. Text messages remained unread according to the delivery notifications, and emails to his personal account generated automatic responses about being away from the office on extended leave. Even reaching out through his work number resulted in his colleague Sandra explaining that Marcus had taken vacation time for personal matters and wouldn't be available until the following week. The silence felt calculated and cruel, a stark contrast to the man who had never let more than 48 hours pass without returning my communications. This wasn't the behavior of someone who had simply forgotten to mention a significant life change during our weekly conversations. This was active avoidance, a deliberate choice to let his new wife handle the fallout of his deception rather than facing me directly. The cowardice implicit in his behavior hurt almost as much as the original betrayal. Verde threads suffered from my distraction, as I struggled to concentrate on campaign analytics and influencer outreach while my personal life imploded. My supervisor Miranda noticed my decreased productivity during our weekly team meeting, asking if everything was all right at home with a tone that suggested professional concern mixed with impatience. I managed to deflect with vague references to family complications, but I could see her making mental notes about my distracted performance. The startup environment demanded complete focus, and my inability to provide it was becoming a liability. Zoe attempted to offer support through increasingly frequent check-ins, bringing coffee to my apartment and listening to my circular rants about Dad's behavior with the patience of a true friend. Her own complicated family history made her uniquely qualified to understand the particular pain of parental betrayal, though she struggled to comprehend the magnitude of Dad's deception. She'd met him several times during visits to Portland, and had always commented on how close we seemed, making his secret marriage feel even more inexplicable and devastating. Connor's attempts to provide comfort were well-intentioned, but ultimately unhelpful, as his stable family background left him without reference points for understanding this level of parental dysfunction. His suggestions about giving Dad the benefit of the doubt and assuming positive intentions felt tone-deaf given the calculated nature of the deception. Our budding relationship began showing strain as I found myself snapping at his attempts to rationalize Dad's behavior or minimize the impact of his choices on my emotional well-being. Sleep became increasingly elusive as my mind raced through possible explanations for Dad's behavior and potential strategies for addressing the crisis. I'd lie awake constructing imaginary conversations where I demanded answers and received satisfying apologies, then cycle through worst-case scenarios where our relationship was permanently damaged by his choices. The apartment's thin walls meant I could hear neighbors going about their normal evening routines, their mundane domesticity highlighting how completely my own life had been destabilized. Angela's follow-up email arrived on Thursday morning with the subject line, "Welcome to the family," and an attachment containing a detailed household policies document. The email's cheerful tone and corporate formatting made it read like orientation materials for a bed and breakfast, rather than communication from a family member. She outlined everything from check-in procedures for visits to restrictions on kitchen usage during meal preparation times, treating my future presence in Dad's house like a business arrangement rather than a family relationship. The attached document was even more insulting, featuring sections on guest room amenities, payment schedules, and house rules that included quiet hours and limits on common area access. Angela had clearly invested significant time in researching hospitality industry standards and adapting them for residential use, complete with references to local hotel rates and vacation rental policies. The professional presentation couldn't disguise the fundamental cruelty of charging your husband's daughter rent to visit her childhood home. One particularly galling section addressed personal belongings storage, explaining that items left in guest areas would be relocated to designated storage spaces in the basement, and that long-term storage would incur additional monthly fees. The implication that my childhood possessions were now clutter to be managed, rather than cherished family artifacts, felt like another deliberate erasure of my history and connection to the house. Angela's efficiency in cataloging and pricing every aspect of my potential visits demonstrated how completely she'd taken ownership of spaces that had been mine for decades. The financial calculations were especially insulting, with overnight rates that exceeded many mid-range hotels in the Portland area. Angela had apparently researched comparable accommodations and priced her guest room service at premium rates, suggesting either complete ignorance of normal family dynamics or deliberate malice disguised as business acumen. The fee structure included charges for utilities, cleaning services, and meal preparation that transformed basic hospitality into a profit-generating enterprise. Reading through Angela's policies made it clear that she viewed my relationship with Dad as a problem to be managed, rather than a connection to be honored. Her systematic approach to limiting and monetizing my access to family spaces suggested careful planning and discussion with Dad about how to minimize disruption to their new domestic arrangements. The casual way she referenced, quote, adult children learning to respect boundaries, indicated that she'd positioned my presence as an intrusion rather than a natural continuation of family relationships. By Friday afternoon, my anger had evolved beyond hurt feelings into a determination to confront Dad directly, regardless of his apparent strategy of avoidance. The possibility that he was genuinely unaware of Angela's extreme policies seemed increasingly unlikely given their comprehensive nature and businesslike presentation. More probably, he'd either requested her to handle the situation or had abdicated responsibility for managing the fallout from his secret marriage, leaving her to implement whatever arrangements she deemed appropriate. The decision to drive to Portland without advance notice felt like a necessary reclamation of agency, in a situation where I'd been relegated to the role of outsider in my own family story. 3 months of secret marriage meant 3 months of lies during our Sunday conversations, 3 months of Dad actively deceiving me while maintaining the pretense of our close relationship. The scope of the deception demanded face-to-face confrontation, not continued phone tag and corporate emails from his new wife. Leaving Seattle on Friday evening meant battling weekend traffic and arriving in Portland after dark, but the urgency of the situation outweighed practical considerations. I'd spent 4 days processing the initial shock and hurt, and now I needed answers that could only come from direct conversation with Dad. The 3-hour drive provided time to rehearse potential conversations and prepare for various scenarios, from defensive explanations to complete denial of wrongdoing. The familiar route down Interstate 5 felt different, knowing that my destination was no longer automatically home but rather the residence of strangers who'd redefined my access and welcome. Landmarks that had always signaled approaching comfort and family connection now represented a journey into uncertain territory, where my status and reception were unclear. The evening light fading over the Willamette Valley seemed ominous rather than beautiful, reflecting my anxiety about what awaited me in Portland. Dad's house looked exactly the same from the exterior, with the same well-maintained landscaping and the same porch light that had welcomed me home countless times before. Angela's car, a silver SUV I'd never seen before, sat in the driveway beside Dad's familiar pickup truck, providing visual confirmation that my childhood home now belonged to people I didn't know. The sight of the unfamiliar vehicle in what had been our family space felt like another small violation of the life I'd thought we shared. Standing on the front porch and ringing the doorbell instead of using my key felt surreal and degrading, reducing me to the status of visitor in a place where I'd lived for 22 years. The delay before someone answered suggested consultation about how to handle my unexpected arrival, possibly discussion about whether they were obligated to accommodate my presence without advance reservation. When the door finally opened, Angela's surprised expression confirmed that my visit was unwelcome, despite her previous claims about looking forward to building family relationships. Angela's greeting was polite, but distinctly cool, acknowledging my unexpected presence, while making it clear that I was disrupting established household routines. She explained that she and Dad had dinner plans with her sister visiting from Vancouver, and that the guest room wasn't prepared for overnight visitors on such short notice. Her tone suggested that my failure to follow proper protocols was creating unnecessary complications for their weekend plans, positioning my distress as inconsiderate behavior rather than reasonable response to devastating family news. Dad appeared behind Angela after several awkward moments, his expression combining guilt, embarrassment, and irritation in equal measure. The man who had raised me to value direct communication and personal responsibility couldn't meet my eyes as he acknowledged my presence with a mumbled greeting. His obvious discomfort with the situation he'd created felt like further betrayal, suggesting that he'd hoped to avoid this confrontation indefinitely, rather than addressing the impact of his choices on our relationship. The living room where we'd shared countless conversations and holiday celebrations felt foreign with Angela's decorating touches and unfamiliar furniture arrangements. Mom's reading chair had been replaced with a modern love seat, and family photos had been supplemented with pictures of Angela's relatives and professional portraits of Dad and Angela together. The systematic erasure of Mom's presence and our family history felt deliberate and cruel, transforming familiar spaces into monuments to Dad's new life. Angela positioned herself as mediator, rather than allowing Dad and me to speak privately, insisting that family discussions should include all family members, and that she had important perspectives to contribute. Her presence made honest conversation impossible, as Dad clearly felt obligated to present a united front with his wife rather than addressing my concerns directly. The dynamic suggested that Angela had already established herself as the primary decision-maker in their household, with Dad deferring to her judgment about how to manage our family crisis. The conversation that followed was stilted and defensive, with Dad offering minimal explanations about why he'd kept the marriage secret and why he'd allowed Angela to handle communication about new household arrangements. His explanations focused on not wanting to worry me unnecessarily and believing that I'd be happy about his newfound happiness once I'd had time to adjust to the changes. The casual dismissal of my legitimate hurt and confusion suggested that he'd completely misunderstood the nature of our relationship and the impact his deception would have on my sense of security and belonging. Angela's contributions to the discussion consistently positioned my concerns as unreasonable and selfish, emphasizing the importance of respecting newlywed privacy and understanding that family dynamics naturally evolved when new marriages occurred. Her references to psychology articles about adult children struggling with parental remarriage felt condescending and inappropriate, particularly given that my objections focused on the deception and financial arrangements rather than simple resistance to change. The ease with which she dismissed my emotional investment in our family home suggested either remarkable insensitivity or calculated cruelty. Dad's failure to defend our relationship or challenge Angela's characterization of my concerns felt like the final confirmation that he'd chosen his new marriage over our father-daughter bond. His passive acceptance of her policies and explanations indicated that he'd either actively participated in planning these changes or had completely abdicated responsibility for maintaining our relationship. Either scenario represented a fundamental betrayal of the values he'd taught me and the connection we'd built over nearly 3 decades. The practical discussion about future visits was even more demoralizing than Angela's initial email, as Dad confirmed that he supported the new arrangements and believed they represented reasonable expectations for adult children. His matter-of-fact acceptance of charging me rent to visit my childhood home demonstrated how completely his priorities had shifted since the marriage. The man who'd always insisted that family came first was now treating our relationship like a business transaction to be managed for profit and convenience. When I attempted to discuss the emotional impact of his deception, Dad's responses were defensive and dismissive, focusing on his right to privacy and happiness rather than acknowledging the pain his choices had caused. His inability or unwillingness to understand why secret marriage and sudden household policy changes might be devastating suggested either remarkable emotional blindness or deliberate minimization of my feelings. The disconnect between his parenting philosophy and his actual behavior felt like discovering that my entire childhood had been built on false foundations. Angela's sister arrived during our conversation, providing Dad with an excuse to end the discussion without resolution or meaningful acknowledgement of the issues I'd raised. The introduction to yet another stranger who apparently knew more about Dad's life than I did felt like additional humiliation, particularly when she referenced previous conversations about Dad's daughter who lived in Seattle. The casual way she discussed my life and circumstances suggested that I'd become a topic of conversation among Dad's new family members without my knowledge or consent. The dinner plans that couldn't be postponed for family crisis management became the excuse for suggesting that I find alternative accommodations for the weekend, since the guest room preparation would take time and their evening commitments couldn't be rearranged. Dad's willingness to send me to a hotel rather than inconvenience his new in-laws provided clear evidence of where his loyalties now resided. The practical message was unmistakable. I was no longer welcome in my family home without advance planning and payment. Standing in the driveway after being essentially dismissed from my childhood home felt like the lowest point of the entire crisis, confirming that Dad's new marriage had completely redefined my place in his life. The house that had always represented security and unconditional love was now controlled by strangers who viewed my presence as an imposition to be managed through policies and fees. The finality of this transformation felt devastating and irreversible, destroying not just our current relationship, but also my ability to trust the memories and connections I'd believed were permanent. The drive to a downtown Portland hotel provided time to process the full scope of what I'd lost through Dad's choices and deception. This wasn't simply about adapting to his remarriage or learning to share his attention with a new spouse. This was about the complete erasure of my role as his daughter and the transformation of our relationship from family bond to customer service interaction. The systematic nature of these changes suggested careful planning and deliberate choices rather than unfortunate oversights or misunderstandings. Checking into the Marriott downtown felt symbolic of my new status as a visitor to my own hometown, dependent on commercial accommodations rather than family hospitality. The hotel's impersonal efficiency provided a stark contrast to the warmth and belonging I'd always associated with Portland visits. The generic room with its corporate artwork and standard amenities felt like a preview of all future visits to the city where I'd grown up, assuming I chose to maintain any connection to Dad's new life. The weekend stretched ahead with no clear plan for resolution or healing, just the grim reality of having confronted my father's betrayal and discovered that it was even more comprehensive than I'd initially realized. Dad had made his choice to prioritize his new marriage over our relationship, and Angela had made her choice to treat me like a problem to be managed, rather than a family member to be welcomed. The combination of their decisions had effectively ended the family structure that had anchored my adult life, leaving me to rebuild my sense of identity and belonging without the foundation I'd always taken for granted. Sleep came fitfully in the unfamiliar hotel environment, interrupted by replaying conversations and imagining alternative scenarios where Dad had chosen honesty and inclusion over deception and exclusion. The air conditioning's hum and the city traffic sounds outside provided an urban soundtrack that felt lonely and disconnected compared to the suburban quiet of Dad's neighborhood. The emotional exhaustion of confronting family betrayal competed with the adrenaline of anger and hurt, creating a restless state that prevented genuine rest or recovery. Saturday morning brought the practical challenge of deciding whether to return to Seattle immediately or attempt further communication with Dad about salvaging some version of our relationship. The previous evening's conversation had made clear that he was committed to his new arrangements and unlikely to reconsider policies that Angela had established. However, the finality of leaving Portland without additional discussion felt like abandoning any possibility of rebuilding trust or finding acceptable compromises for future interaction. The hotel breakfast room was filled with other travelers navigating their own weekend plans and family obligations, their casual conversations about sightseeing and reunion activities highlighting how different my Portland visit had become from the comfortable family time I'd always expected. The normalcy of other families enjoying their relationships felt both envious and distant, emphasizing how isolated I'd become through Dad's choices and deception. Angela's text message arrived while I was finishing coffee, confirming that they were available for further discussion later in the day if I wanted to continue our conversation about family arrangements. The business-like tone and scheduling approach reinforced her view of our relationship as a customer service interaction rather than family crisis management. Her willingness to squeeze me into their weekend schedule felt insulting rather than accommodating, particularly given that she was offering time to discuss policies she'd implemented without consultation. The prospect of returning to Dad's house for another stilted conversation with Angela moderating felt both necessary and futile. Necessary because unresolved family crises demanded attention, but futile because the previous evening had demonstrated Dad's commitment to his new priorities. The power dynamic that had emerged made meaningful negotiation impossible, as Angela clearly controlled household decisions and Dad supported her authority regardless of the impact on our relationship. My phone showed multiple missed calls from Zoe and Connor, both trying to check on my Portland confrontation and offer support for whatever I'd discovered. The gap between their caring concern and my family's indifference felt stark and telling, highlighting how dramatically my support system had shifted over the past week. The friends who'd known me for years were providing more emotional support than the father who'd raised me, a reversal that felt both heartbreaking and clarifying. The decision to meet with Dad and Angela one final time felt like necessary closure rather than hopeful reconciliation. An opportunity to clearly communicate my boundaries and expectations rather than attempting to change their minds about established policies. The emotional work of accepting that our relationship had fundamentally changed was painful, but essential for moving forward with realistic expectations about future interaction. Returning to Dad's house in daylight emphasized how completely the space had been transformed to reflect Angela's preferences and priorities. New garden features replaced Mom's carefully tended flower beds, and updated exterior lighting created a more modern aesthetic that erased familiar visual cues from my childhood. The systematic removal of elements that connected the house to our family history felt deliberate and comprehensive, suggesting that Angela viewed my mother's memory as competition rather than honored family legacy. The afternoon conversation confirmed that Dad and Angela had discussed our previous evening's exchange and reached mutual agreement about maintaining their established policies, regardless of my objections. Dad's prepared talking points about healthy boundaries and natural family evolution felt rehearsed and defensive, suggesting that Angela had coached him on appropriate responses to my concerns. His inability to engage in spontaneous, honest discussion about our relationship felt like further evidence of how completely his new marriage had changed his personality and priorities. Angela's role as primary spokesperson for their household decisions became even more pronounced during the second conversation, with Dad deferring to her expertise on family dynamics and conflict resolution. Her references to therapeutic literature and recommended approaches for managing adult children suggested that she'd researched strategies for handling my objections, rather than considering whether those objections might be legitimate. The clinical approach to our family crisis felt dehumanizing and insulting, reducing complex emotional relationships to problems requiring management techniques. The final conversation ended with clear communication about future expectations on both sides, though these expectations were fundamentally incompatible with maintaining meaningful relationship. Dad and Angela would continue their household policies and fee structures for visits, while I would need to decide whether those terms were acceptable for ongoing family contact. The ultimatum format felt like emotional extortion, forcing me to choose between accepting degrading treatment or losing access to my father entirely. Leaving Portland that evening felt like emigrating from my own history, abandoning not just current relationships but also the connections to place and memory that had always anchored my identity. The drive north on Interstate 5 represented more than geographical transition. It symbolized the complete reconstruction of my adult life without the family foundation that had always provided security and belonging. The rearview mirror reflection of Portland's skyline felt like viewing a former life that was no longer accessible or welcoming. The return to Seattle brought the practical challenge of explaining my family crisis to friends and colleagues, while processing the emotional implications of Dad's choices for my future planning and sense of self. The apartment that had always felt like temporary accommodation pending eventual return to Portland now needed to become permanent home, requiring both practical adjustments and psychological acceptance of my changed circumstances. Verde Threads would demand renewed focus and energy despite my emotional exhaustion, as the startup environment couldn't accommodate extended personal crisis management. My relationship with Connor would need honest discussion about how family trauma was affecting my availability and emotional capacity for romantic development. The entire structure of my adult life required examination and potential revision based on the reality that Dad was no longer a reliable source of support or security. The weekend's confrontations had clarified that Dad's betrayal was comprehensive and deliberate, rather than unfortunate misunderstanding, eliminating hope for simple resolution or easy forgiveness. The systematic nature of his deception and the calculated cruelty of Angela's policies demanded response and boundary setting rather than passive acceptance. The emotional work of rebuilding identity and relationships without family foundation would be challenging but necessary for moving forward with integrity and self-respect. The weeks following my return from Portland brought a strange clarity that emerged from the wreckage of everything I'd believed about family and belonging. The initial devastation slowly transformed into something more purposeful as I began recognizing patterns in Dad's behavior that I'd previously overlooked or excused. The man who'd taught me about integrity and honest communication had been living a compartmentalized life for months, maintaining our relationship through careful performance while building an entirely separate domestic reality with Angela. Processing this betrayal required examining not just the recent deception, but years of subtle signs that Dad had been prioritizing his own comfort over authentic connection. His reluctance to discuss dating after Mom's death hadn't been grief-related caution, but rather secretive behavior designed to avoid accountability or input from me. The home renovation projects he'd mentioned casually during our Sunday calls had been preparations for Angela's arrival, undertaken without any consideration of how these changes might affect my relationship to family spaces. Verde Threads provided unexpected refuge during this period of personal upheaval, as the demanding pace of sustainable fashion marketing left little mental space for circular thinking about family trauma. Miranda noticed my renewed focus and intensity, commenting that whatever personal challenges I'd been navigating seemed to have resulted in improved professional performance. The crisis had stripped away distractions and forced prioritization of elements within my control, creating laser focus on career development and financial independence. My relationship with Connor underwent significant strain, as I struggled to trust romantic connection while processing parental betrayal. His attempts to provide comfort and perspective felt inadequate given the magnitude of my family crisis, and his suggestions about forgiveness and understanding revealed fundamental differences in our approaches to relationship boundaries. The realization that I needed a partner who could match my intensity and understand the importance of family loyalty led to honest conversations about our incompatibility and eventual amicable separation. Zoe's support proved invaluable during this transition period, as her own experience with dysfunctional family dynamics provided both practical advice and emotional validation. She understood the particular pain of discovering that parents weren't the people you'd believed them to be, and her perspective on rebuilding identity after family betrayal offered roadmaps for moving forward. Our friendship deepened through shared vulnerability about family disappointment and the challenge of creating chosen family when biological family proved unreliable. The financial implications of losing access to Dad's house as backup security required immediate attention and long-term planning adjustments. The Portland property that had always represented potential refuge during career setbacks or economic uncertainty was no longer available without degrading rental arrangements that I refused to accept. This reality demanded increased emergency savings, more conservative spending habits, and serious consideration of career advancement opportunities that could provide greater financial stability. Angela's periodic emails updating me on household policies and fee structures continued arriving with corporate efficiency that felt increasingly absurd and insulting. Her latest communication included seasonal rate adjustments based on Portland tourism patterns, and detailed explanations of additional charges for holiday visits when their hosting responsibilities increased. The business-like approach to family relationships became a source of dark humor rather than genuine hurt, representing such extreme dysfunction that it deserved mockery rather than emotional investment. Dad's continued silence spoke louder than any explanation could have, confirming that he'd chosen to abdicate responsibility for managing the fallout from his deception. His willingness to let Angela handle all communication about our relationship demonstrated either remarkable cowardice or complete agreement with her approach to family boundary management. Either explanation revealed character flaws that were impossible to ignore or excuse, fundamentally changing my understanding of the man who'd raised me. The holiday season approaching brought both dread and liberation as I contemplated the first Thanksgiving and Christmas without our traditional celebrations. The prospect of missing familiar rituals felt painful, but it also offered opportunities to create new traditions that reflected my actual relationships, rather than obligatory family performance. The freedom to spend holidays with chosen family or pursue travel opportunities represented unexpected benefits of being released from dysfunctional family obligations. Professional opportunities at Verde Threads expanded during this period, as my increased availability and dedication became apparent to management. Miranda offered me leadership of a major campaign targeting millennial consumers interested in sustainable fashion choices, a project that required extensive travel and client interaction. The promotion came with significant salary increases and stock options that dramatically improved my financial security and career trajectory, benefits that might not have been possible if I'd remained emotionally invested in family crisis management. My Seattle social circle gradually learned about my family situation through carefully edited explanations that focused on my father's remarriage rather than the comprehensive betrayal and deception involved. Most friends responded with sympathy and support, though their suggestions about eventual reconciliation revealed their inability to comprehend the magnitude of trust violation involved. The gap between their assumptions about normal family conflict and my reality of systematic exclusion and financial exploitation became another source of isolation that required independent navigation. Therapy became essential for processing the complex grief involved in losing family relationships that hadn't actually died but had been fundamentally altered beyond recognition. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a family systems specialist recommended by my primary care physician, provided frameworks for understanding parental narcissism and the particular challenges of adult children whose parents remarry late in life. Her validation of my emotional responses and practical advice about boundary setting offered tools for moving forward without requiring forgiveness or reconciliation. The apartment hunting process, that had seemed urgent immediately after Portland confrontation, evolved into a more strategic search for housing that reflected my new priorities and financial capabilities. The increased income from my Verdi Threads promotion made better neighborhoods accessible, and the emotional independence gained from family crisis opened possibilities for living arrangements that prioritized my comfort rather than maintaining easy access to family obligations. The search became an exercise in defining adult identity separate from family expectations or approval. Connor's replacement in my romantic life came through unexpected connection with Dr. Martinez's colleague, Dr. James Chen, a marine biology researcher who shared my interest in environmental sustainability and understood the complexity of family trauma from professional and personal experience. His own experience with immigrant parents who'd struggled to understand his career choices provided common ground for discussing family disappointment and the challenge of building identity independent from parental approval. Our relationship developed slowly and thoughtfully, with mutual respect for each other's emotional boundaries and healing processes. Angela's Christmas card arrived in early December, with a professional family photo featuring her, dad, and her sister's children, positioned as if they represented a complete family unit. The image of Dad surrounded by Angela's relatives while I was completely absent from family representation felt like deliberate cruelty, disguised as holiday cheer. The accompanying note about hoping to see me during the holiday season included rate information for peak season accommodation, maintaining the business transaction approach to family relationships that had become Angela's signature style. The decision to spend Christmas in Costa Rica with James represented both practical escape from family holiday pressure and symbolic commitment to building life experiences that didn't require family approval or participation. The sustainable ecotourism focus of our trip aligned with my professional interests while providing adventure and romance that had been missing from my Seattle routine. The photographs and memories created during this trip offered positive holiday associations that replaced painful family traditions with chosen experiences. Dad's birthday in January passed without acknowledgement from me for the first time in my adult life, a deliberate choice that felt both petty and necessary. The man who'd forgotten to mention his marriage didn't deserve celebration of milestones in our relationship, particularly when he'd systematically excluded me from significant events in his life. The emotional work of not sending cards or gifts required conscious effort, but it represented important boundary setting about reciprocal relationship expectations. Professional recognition continued expanding as my Verdi Threads campaign exceeded performance targets and attracted industry attention for innovative approaches to sustainable fashion marketing. The success opened networking opportunities with other companies focused on environmental responsibility, leading to speaking engagements and consulting offers that enhanced both my reputation and income potential. The career advancement that had always been secondary to family obligations became primary focus with surprisingly satisfying results. Angela's spring update email included photographs of extensive home renovations that had transformed Dad's house into completely different property. The kitchen where I'd learned to cook, the living room where we'd watched movies together, and the dining room where we'd shared holiday meals had been modernized beyond recognition. The systematic erasure of family history and memory continued through Angela's decorating choices, eliminating physical connections to my childhood and mother's presence with ruthless efficiency. The one-year anniversary of Angela's first phone call approached with mixed emotions as I reflected on the personal growth and professional success that had emerged from family crisis. The woman who'd called me a tenant had unknowingly initiated a process of independence and self-discovery that might never have occurred if Dad had maintained his comfortable deception indefinitely. The painful catalyst had produced positive changes that exceeded anything I could have planned or pursued deliberately. James's proposal came during a weekend hiking trip in the Olympic Mountains, accompanied by thoughtful discussion about building family structures based on mutual respect and honest communication rather than obligation or tradition. His understanding of my family trauma and commitment to creating healthier relationship patterns offered hope for partnership that honored both independence and connection. The engagement represented not just romantic commitment, but also symbolic rejection of dysfunctional family models in favor of chosen love and respect. The wedding planning process deliberately excluded Dad and Angela from guest lists and celebration activities, a choice that felt empowering rather than vindictive. The ceremony would celebrate love and commitment among people who demonstrated genuine care and support, rather than biological relationships that had proven unreliable. My chosen family of friends, colleagues, and James's relatives would witness our commitment to building something healthy and sustainable together. Dad's unexpected phone call 3 weeks before my wedding broke nearly 2 years of silence with a fumbling attempt to express regret about our estrangement and request invitation to my ceremony. His surprise that I was engaged and planning marriage without his knowledge revealed how completely disconnected he'd become from my actual life events. The conversation was brief and unsatisfying, as his offers of reconciliation came without acknowledgement of his behavior or willingness to establish respectful boundaries with Angela. The wedding day itself was everything I'd hoped for in terms of celebrating love with people who genuinely supported our relationship and respected our choices. James's family welcomed me warmly, and my chosen family of Seattle friends created joyful atmosphere that honored our commitment without drama or family politics. The absence of Dad felt notable but not devastating, confirming that I'd successfully built life structure that didn't require his approval or participation for completeness. The honeymoon in New Zealand provided opportunities for adventure and reflection about the life I'd built through surviving family betrayal and choosing personal growth over victimhood. The stunning landscapes and challenging hiking experiences offered metaphors for the journey from Portland crisis to Seattle stability, emphasizing how obstacles could become catalysts for positive change when approached with determination and support. James's companionship throughout these adventures confirmed that I'd chosen partnership based on mutual respect and shared values rather than convenience or familiarity. Returning to Seattle as a married woman brought practical challenges of combining households and establishing new routines, but also reinforced the sense of having created family structure based on choice rather than obligation. Our apartment search focused on finding space that could accommodate both our professional needs and personal interests, representing collaborative decision-making that honored both perspectives rather than deferring to established authority or tradition. The process felt healthy and empowering compared to family dynamics I'd experienced in childhood. Angela's congratulations card on our marriage included updated rate sheets for married couples visiting Portland, maintaining her business approach to family relationships even in the face of major life changes. The persistence of her transactional perspective on family connection had become almost comical in its inappropriateness, representing such extreme dysfunction that it no longer triggered emotional reaction. Her inability to recognize normal family relationship patterns provided ongoing confirmation that maintaining distance was healthy choice rather than punitive behavior. The second anniversary of Dad's betrayal passed with minimal emotional impact as I focused on building marriage and career success that didn't require family validation or support. The life I'd constructed in Seattle with James provided stability and satisfaction that exceeded anything I'd experienced while trying to maintain connection with Dad and his dysfunctional new household. The comparison highlighted how much energy I'd wasted trying to preserve relationships that didn't serve my emotional or practical needs. Professional success continued expanding as Verde Threads grew, and my role evolved into Director of Sustainable Marketing with national responsibility for campaign development and industry partnerships. The position required extensive travel and client interaction that would have been difficult to manage while maintaining family obligations in Portland, confirming that Dad's betrayal had inadvertently freed me to pursue opportunities that required complete professional dedication. The irony wasn't lost on me that his selfishness had enabled my success in ways that his support might not have achieved. James's research opportunities led to consulting work that required periodic international travel, creating marriage dynamic that honored both independence and partnership while maintaining strong emotional connection. Our relationship model emphasized individual growth and professional development within committed partnership, representing healthy alternative to family patterns I'd experienced, where individual needs were subordinated to family convenience or tradition. The contrast reinforced my conviction that chosen relationships could provide superior support and respect compared to biological family connections. Dad's third attempt at reconciliation came through a lengthy letter delivered to my office, apparently obtained through internet research, since I'd never provided my workplace address to him or Angela. The letter expressed general regret about our estrangement and specific requests for relationship repair that didn't acknowledge his deception or Angela's inappropriate behavior. His focus on moving forward without addressing past harm revealed continued inability to understand the trust violation involved or take responsibility for choices that had damaged our relationship permanently. The decision to respond to Dad's letter with clear communication about my boundaries and expectations felt necessary for closure rather than relationship repair. My response outlined specific behaviors that would be required for any future contact, including acknowledgement of his deception, apology for allowing Angela to implement degrading policies, and commitment to establishing respectful boundaries for future interaction. The letter was designed to provide clear roadmap for potential reconciliation while protecting myself from further harm or disappointment. Dad's silence following my boundary-setting letter confirmed that he remained unwilling to take responsibility for his choices or challenge Angela's authority over family relationships. The lack of response provided final confirmation that he'd chosen his new marriage over our father-daughter relationship permanently, eliminating remaining hope for meaningful reconciliation or repair. The clarity felt liberating rather than devastating, confirming that I'd made correct choice in building life independent from family dysfunction. The birth of our daughter Emma 3 years after my wedding brought joy and perspective that emphasized how completely I'd moved beyond family trauma into healthy relationship patterns. James's excitement about fatherhood and commitment to respectful parenting provided confidence that our family would operate according to principles of honesty and mutual support, rather than manipulation or control. The opportunity to model healthy family dynamics for our child felt like ultimate victory over the dysfunction I'd experienced in childhood. Emma's first birthday celebration included friends and James's family, who'd consistently demonstrated love and support throughout our relationship, creating community that honored our choices and respected our boundaries. The gathering represented chosen family at its best, with people who'd earned their places in our lives through behavior and commitment rather than biological connection or obligation. The contrast with my childhood family experiences reinforced my conviction that family should be defined by respect and care, rather than genetics or tradition. Dad's letter requesting to meet his granddaughter arrived when Emma was 18 months old, expressing surprise that he'd become grandfather without notification, and requesting opportunity to establish relationship with her. His assumption that I would share my child with someone who'd proven untrustworthy and disrespectful revealed continued inability to understand how his choices had affected our relationship. The request felt presumptuous and inappropriate given his track record of prioritizing convenience over family connection. The response to Dad's request was firm and clear, explaining that Emma would be protected from family dysfunction and that her relationships would be limited to people who demonstrated consistent respect and reliability. Dad's pattern of deception and abandonment disqualified him from grandfather privileges, and Angela's hostility toward me made her presence around my child unacceptable. The decision felt protective rather than punitive, prioritizing Emma's emotional security over biological family traditions. James's support throughout my family boundary decisions reinforced the strength of our partnership and his commitment to protecting our family unit from toxic influences. His understanding of complex family dynamics and willingness to prioritize our child's well-being over social expectations about grandparent relationships demonstrated the wisdom of choosing partnership based on shared values rather than romantic attraction alone. Our united approach to family protection created security for Emma that I'd never experienced in my own childhood. The 5th anniversary of Angela's phone call passed with gratitude rather than regret, as I reflected on the life I'd built through surviving family betrayal and choosing growth over grievance. The successful career, loving marriage, and healthy family I'd created exceeded anything I could have achieved while remaining emotionally entangled with Dad's dysfunction. The painful catalyst had produced transformation that required courage but delivered satisfaction beyond my previous imagination. Emma's development into a curious and confident toddler provided daily evidence that healthy family dynamics produced different outcomes than the dysfunction I'd experienced. Her security in our love and trust in our consistency offered hope that generational patterns could be changed through conscious parenting choices. The opportunity to give her childhood stability that I'd thought I had but actually lacked felt like completing circle of healing and growth. The letter from Dad's attorney arrived when Emma was 2 years old, informing me that Dad had updated his will to exclude me completely due to our, quote, estrangement by your choice, and wanting to ensure his estate would benefit people who'd, quote, honored family relationships. The legal document represented final confirmation of his character and priorities, eliminating any remaining possibility of relationship repair or inheritance expectations. The notification felt like administrative detail rather than emotional blow, confirming that I'd successfully detached from family outcomes beyond my control. Angela's Christmas cards had stopped arriving after my marriage, apparently indicating that her business approach to family relationships didn't extend to people who refused to engage with her customer service model. The silence felt like relief rather than rejection, eliminating one source of annual irritation and manipulation attempt. Her absence from my life represented successful boundary enforcement rather than relationship loss. The completion of Emma's 3rd year brought reflection on how completely my life had transformed since that devastating phone call from Angela. The family I'd created with James provided everything I'd thought I had with Dad but actually lacked: honest communication, mutual respect, shared values, and commitment to each other's happiness and growth. The contrast highlighted how settling for dysfunctional family patterns had limited my understanding of what healthy relationships could provide. James's promotion to senior researcher at the University of Washington brought professional recognition and financial stability that eliminated any remaining practical concerns about my choice to separate from Dad's resources. Our combined success created security for Emma and opportunities for travel and experiences that enriched our family life. The independence we'd achieved confirmed that chosen family could provide superior support compared to biological family relationships based on obligation rather than genuine care. Emma's questions about grandparents required age-appropriate explanations about how families came in different forms, and that some people weren't safe or healthy to be around even if they were related to us. Her easy acceptance of these concepts and focus on the loving relationships she did have provided evidence that children could thrive without extended family when their immediate family provided consistent security and support. The simplicity of her perspective offered wisdom about focusing on present relationships rather than mourning absent ones. The 6th anniversary of my family crisis brought gratitude for the personal strength and professional success that had emerged from surviving betrayal and choosing growth over grievance. The life I'd built in Seattle with James and Emma exceeded anything I could have imagined while trying to maintain connection with Dad's dysfunction. The painful catalyst had produced transformation that required courage but delivered satisfaction and security beyond my previous dreams. The final confirmation of my healing came through genuine indifference to Dad's choices and Angela's behavior rather than continued anger or hurt about their treatment of me. Their dysfunction had become irrelevant to my daily happiness and long-term planning, representing past obstacles that had been overcome rather than ongoing sources of pain. The emotional detachment felt like victory rather than loss, confirming that I'd successfully rebuilt identity and relationships based on respect and love, rather than obligation and tradition. Emma's 4th birthday celebration, surrounded by friends and James's family, who'd consistently demonstrated love and support, represented the complete family I'd created through choosing people based on their behavior rather than their biology. The joy and security visible in our daughter's face confirmed that healthy family dynamics produced different outcomes than dysfunction, offering hope that generational patterns could be changed through conscious choices and commitment to respect and honesty in relationships. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.